Alright, we are Bila, guys. Welcome back. My name is Zanemvula and you are watching Girl Boss SA. Today we're going to be talking about fertility in the African context, divine femininity in the period, in pregnancy, and in birth. We know that the word divine, it literally means of God or from God. It comes from the Latin word Deus. One thing that all faiths agree on is that God is the creator. And one thing that we all know scientifically is that creation is facilitated by the female organism. Therefore, the divine feminine, first and foremost, speaks of the power and the ability of the female organism to regenerate and continue the cycle of life. Most references in the African knowledge system that speak of the source of creation speak of female elements, and they often reference water as the supporting element to the beginning of all creation. For instance, ancient Kemetic science refers to the waters of noon, and a physical manifestation of these waters on earth and specifically in the female body occurs in the womb. This parallel to the waters of noon where life began occurs in our wombs where human life begins. So when we speak about the menstrual cycle, we speak about the cycle of the moon because we as females are connected to the moon, which carries the divine feminine energy. Female blood has remarkable authority and effectiveness in African spiritual practice. The menstrual blood of a woman is considered to be very sacred, and in some cultures is known to have the power to ward off evil spirits. In our modern day, the menstrual cycle has become a source of embarrassment for many women, even though it was once understood culturally that the ability to shed blood was an example of her unique fertility. Blood is generally viewed in African cultures as the source of life. Almost every African culture has rituals associated with blood. We usually know this in the context of the blood of animals because fertilizing the ground with the blood of certain animals, special animals like goats, chickens, cows, it's a vital part of many religious rites. This is the rite that enables priests and healers and diviners to call on the gods and the ancestors to ask for protection against evil forces. However, one of the first references to the magical power of blood is in one of the most ancient texts in the world, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, or the Book of Coming Forth by Day. This book speaks of the blood of our mother, the goddess Oset. Asa refers to the blood of Oset as an amulet of protection against all forces of evil. In the African knowledge system, blood is generally one of the most important elements in our practice. It's always been a symbol of atonement and cleansing, which is why the Christian faith also adopted the practice and converted the narrative to the blood of Jesus. All that context all leads back to the original African knowledge system that upholds the sacredness of blood and the understanding that it is the source of life. We as human beings come from the womb, all of us, and the womb holds and releases blood on a monthly basis in preparation for the creation of life. The blood of the womb was often referred to as the sacred waters in several African cultures and knowledge systems throughout the continent because it was exactly parallel to the waters of noon and all the different creation stories that attribute creation to the advent of the first waters or the first rain. These sacred waters all speak of the waters of creation from which all life emerged, and it is exactly parallel to the sacred waters of the womb. These are the waters from which we emerge during our first stages of conception, all of us. So the shaming of period blood is essentially one of the most ignorant acts because it is the element that allows for all of our existence. Period shaming is largely due to the fact that the overwhelming majority of Africa is now patriarchal, and this wasn't always the case. Patriarchy is not the African way. Our matriarchal societies were largely replaced with the intervention of both the Arab and the European religions and customs. We were forced into foreign livelihoods and belief systems that aren't in alignment with nature and therefore were not in alignment with us as African people. For instance, We may not acknowledge it in our day and age, but fertility itself is of the utmost importance in African culture to African people. Fertility occupies a central place in African culture. Fertility is the expression of God's continuous creation through human beings, plants, animals, and minerals. It's the sacred life force that we all share. So it was our belief as Africans that it is our responsibility and our sacred duty, and it is also in our best interest to appreciate and protect the harmonious flow of life that expresses itself through fertility. Given that women were revered for their ability to bring forth new life, there's certain foods that are believed to negatively affect their fertility, so they have to avoid those kinds of foods. Generally, in Africa, we're also very well known for the sacred analogy between the woman's womb and the clay pot. Women are often depicted as potters in African imagery. We're depicted as potters, recreating life through the molding of clay. Clay is the stuff of life. Like the African creation story often refers to the gods creating and molding us out of clay in the initial stages of our form. So then the clay pot metaphorically establishes the African woman as mother and creator, with the pot being a symbol of the womb. Many names of African goddesses are spelled in Egyptian hieroglyphs, with the hieroglyph of the clay pot, like Nut, who I've spoken about in a previous video. For instance, among the Bemba people of Central Africa, a very important part of female initiation involves the making of a clay pot. For them, the clay pot represents the woman's womb waiting to be filled with life. Generally in Africa, pregnancy and children are believed to be gifts from the ancestors. Many African societies actually believe that the birth of a child is the return of an ancestor. So many people actually seek the help of a diviner to identify that ancestor, so that when the child is born, they're given the name of that ancestor or a name linking them to that reincarnated ancestor. In Yoruba, for example, names like Babatunde means the father comes again, or Yetunde, which means the mother comes again. Those are some common names among the Yoruba people. In the case of infertility, the ancestors are also suspected for interfering with the couple's ability to get pregnant. So in a case like that, they will perform the necessary rituals to appease the ancestor, to get them to change their mind and allow for a child to come. So generally, African people embrace the idea surrounding the re-entry of a child into the world through the female body. Our cultural history and mythology link creation, womanhood, reincarnation, regeneration, and promise. The god Ngai or Ngai in Kenya, the god of the Maasai people, give each spirit at the time of birth a protector who keeps the person safe throughout their life, and who at the time of birth takes their soul back to God. Hundreds of African gods and ancestors are dedicated to the process of birth. In some societies, a woman must actually be secluded at some point in her pregnancy. For instance, I've read that a pregnant Igbo woman of Nigeria must live in isolation after her 5th month of pregnancy. All of these kinds of measures are taken to protect the unborn child. A pregnant woman is generally expected to engage in specific activities that'll keep her and the child safe until the child is born. Communities also carry out expansive and elaborate rituals to thank God for the gift of the child that's coming and to pray for the protection of both the mother and the child. Some women even wear talismans for protection during the pregnancy. It's also common practice for an African woman to return to her homestead during pregnancy until the child is born. We've also, as Africans, developed very complex rituals regarding the disposition of the placenta as part of a practice that has always been a part of our history, because the placenta is the physical manifestation of the sacred link between the mother and the child. It actually cannot be emphasized enough how important it is to be mindful of how we deal with the placenta after the child is born, especially as African people, because this has always been a very sacred ritual throughout our continent and in our African knowledge system throughout our history. Many healers that I know attribute the main root of people's physical, spiritual, and mental ailments to the fact that their parents disregarded the correct care of the placenta during the birthing process. The placenta is a membranic sac in which the human fetus develops. It's how the mother transmits the necessary oxygen, nutrients, and blood that's necessary for the baby's development to the baby. Spiritually, the placenta carries vital energy that can be used to affect the mother and the child either positively or negatively. So the treatment of the placenta following the birth of a child is an area of important spiritual attention. The umbilical cord is the lifeline between a developing child and its female parent. Many African cultures consider the umbilical cord as an essential part of birth rituals. The umbilical cord's drying up or falling off implies the person's full coming into being. Once an infant comes into the world from the womb, it remains attached to the mother until the umbilical cord is cut, tied, or detached in some way. So then the baby is no longer a part of its mother's womb, but is now a part of the family or the community. The umbilical cord is reflective of continuity because the baby is a continuation of its ancestors. In ancient Kemet, the placenta was considered to be a spirit double of the child. Among the Ngoni people, the baby's first bath is given over the spot where the placenta is buried with the cloth that was used to deliver the baby. The Edo people require that water from the baby's first bath must be poured over that site, and that an elderly woman should present a dish of yam to that spot. Even some cultures within the African diaspora bury the placenta within the homestead or even at the threshold of the doorway. Generally, it's just compulsory that the placenta be buried within the homestead or the ancestral land of the child, so that the child can receive the blessings and the protection of their ancestors throughout their life. This way, the ancestors are notified of the latest entry in their bloodline, and they're given access to intervene on the child's behalf should they come across any challenges in life. This way, the child avoids any unnecessary health problems, financial issues, and just any general ancestrally related hardships. In Sierra Leone, a baby is only named after the umbilical cord has dropped off. They treat the placenta as a special object. Following birth, the placenta is buried by specifically the child's maternal female elders. A hole is dug below a banana tree by the wife's mother. The placenta is placed in a circle, and the end that connected the mother to the child is buried faced upwards. If it's not buried in the upright position, the people of Sierra Leone believe that this causes infertility. Then there's the Mende people, who have a very strong connection to Africans born in the United States. It's said that the Gula or the Geechee people of South Carolina share the language, rituals, and crafts of the people of Sierra Leone. So their beliefs concerning the umbilical cord are similar. The umbilical cord and the placenta are buried at the homestead to remind the child where he or she comes from. And they also plant a fruit tree at that spot where the umbilical cord and the placenta are buried to ensure that the child will never go hungry. The Fang community in Cameroon braid the umbilical cord with white yarn and place it around the wrist of the child. They'll also hold it in their left hand while they name the child during the naming ritual, the naming ceremony of the child, as they also recite the lineage of the child. And they preserve the umbilical cord, so they have a lineage of umbilical cords at the homestead. This is how they attach people to their direct ancestors and their gods in the land of their ancestors. The Shona people of Zimbabwe, the grandparents bury the umbilical cord in a small clay pot during the child's naming ceremony. When the Xhosa people perform amasiko during the birth ritual, the whole family is involved. The seen, the unseen, the living, and the departed. The baby is welcomed by the elderly females until awise ingaba, which is when a piece of the umbilical cord falls off. And this is not necessarily taking into account what has been adopted by the Western birthing system and the Western healthcare system. Traditionally, the Xhosa woman will give birth in her homestead. The burial of Inkaba cements the connection between the infant child and its ancestral land. The site where the umbilical cord is buried is used to refer to somebody's ancestral land, the place of birth, the connection to their home, their family, their ancestors, their spiritual realm. The place where the umbilical cord is buried is important. It's very important. It's sacred. It's spiritual because it also then lets the child know throughout their life where it is that they must go back to connect with Amatongo, the ancestors. That is where the ancestors await them to intervene on their behalf. Babies that are born with parts of the embryonic membrane covering their head are said to be born with a veil or a caul. These children throughout the diaspora are considered to be born with the ability to see and hear ghosts or spirits. The only way to help the child escape the responsibility that comes with being born with that gift is to keep the embryonic membrane, because the well-being of the membrane is directly linked to the child. If it's torn, the child will die. If the child is well, then the membrane should always be firm. This belief is the same throughout West Africa, Guyana, Jamaica, Haiti. Protection of the placenta is imperative because it can be used by people who wish you harm. It can be used to manipulate the energy of the mother and the child. So currently we don't have access to placental disposal and preservation rituals as African people, which I've come to understand through my research and my experience with doctors and healers. I've come to understand that this is the root problem of a lot of our problems as African people. The westernized healthcare system prevents families from having access to the placenta following the birth of their infants. This isn't a conspiracy, it's a fact. I'm not at liberty to say whether it's deliberate or not, but it is without a doubt one of the roots of our collective ailments as African people. Because logically, if your life is interrupted from the moment that you're born, it becomes really easy to disrupt the rest of your destiny. Every stage of a woman's fertility is at the center of African spirituality. It has always been. This is the practice that allowed us to thrive as a people before all of those customs were interrupted. This is a reminder to women to honor your cycle because it's a physical manifestation of the divine feminine that is the source of all existence. Of all existence, it's not a curse like the Bible tries to convince us. It is an expression of the creation force through you. Knowledge is power, and only through knowledge can we have our true uprising. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Take care of yourselves, guys.